Welcome everyone to the 19th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication, supports for council standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility at london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. With that, I'd like to go to any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Committee? I see none. Moving on to the consent items. Any consent items that need to be pulled? Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, if I could ask for item 2.10 to be pulled.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I think I'll pull 2.15. It's really to ask a question, but I just want to keep it clean instead of getting into long discussions about consent items.
And with that, I'd like to put the rest of the consent items on the floor. And if the committee would allow me, I just want to just make a comment. I guess first of all, if I can have a motion to receive the consent items. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner. Sorry, so we've got comments, and I'll go to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question on number 2.12. Is that the one that I have? Nope, sorry, not that one. My apologies. I have a question on another item. Item 2.14, the minor variance applications considered by the Committee of Adjustment. So there on page number, through you, Madam Chair, on page number 139, it talks about the different changes that came about as a result of Bill 73, and that started the process of the moratoriums and those kinds of, if anybody wanted to go to the Committee of Adjustment during that two-year moratorium period, it has to first come to Planning Committee and Council for a decision to allow it to go to the Committee of Adjustment. So there have been a number of changes. So the previous government, the previous provincial government made some changes to the Planning Act, and then in the new provincial government, there were a number of additional changes made, some of them going back. So I'm wondering through you, Madam Chair, if there's anticipation of any changes to this, or if we foresee that this will continue the way it has been for the last little while.
Through you, Madam Chair, planning staff's not aware of any upcoming changes that would result in changing the current status from what has been enacted through Bill 174 or 74. Excuse me.
Great, thank you. And I just have a comment to make on the Building Division monthly report. We're looking at the end of September, and we're already up over $1 billion, I believe. And I just want to say congratulations to staff. And I know how hard staff works to get these applications processed and to get everything moving in that division. And we see the results. I know that there's one really big construction item in there that really brings the numbers up, but we've been over $1 billion every year for the past, this is now the 5th year in a row, and we're already at the end of September at that mark. So looks like we're on track to probably a record-breaking year. And through you, Madam Chair, I just want to say thanks to staff for all their hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. If the committee will allow me just to make a comment, and just following up on 2.14, which is the information report on the minor variance application, I do want to note that we will be receiving a future report to the Planning Committee, which will provide options on certain types of minor variances. That's still to come. But I want to thank staff for this report. I know we had asked for this a while back, and it's going to give us some, it was a great read to know where we are and how many minor variance requests we've approved, and it was good information to have, and really appreciate that. I'd also like to make a comment on 2.13, which is the 2-year working program. And I know that we've had a number of changes in the planning department as well as in development services. And this really gave me a clear outline as to the 2-year planning report. It was very much appreciated. And obviously there's a number of breakdown in responsibilities and new divisions being set up too. So again, it was a great read as well. So thank you very much to staff for the reports. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I certainly echo the comments on the 2-year work plan. I did have it certainly shows at a glance how ambitious and full the agenda is for the planning department over the next couple of years. I was surprised to see that support for advisory committees for the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee on the planning advisory, or for the planning work plan on the day-to-day services delivered by the division. That seemed more along the lines of something that would be in Mr. Katolik's bailiwick than within planning. Is there a rationale for why it sits within the planning division?
Through you, Madam Chair. So this would be on an as-needed basis that we do have folks in our department that are assisting those committees. I'm sure that there are also staff in other divisions that also do that as well.
Thank you. I guess that makes a bit of sense. So it's not primary support, it's ad hoc. With respect to 2.14, the minor variance question, the report makes mention of the number of times that things have been sent to the to LPAT or the OMB. I'd be curious to know how frequently Committee of Adjustment decisions are overturned at LPAT. Was there any sense of that? Sorry, the reason I ask is just to get a sense of the sense of understanding of the planning legislation and matters that to make sure that there's a soundness of decisions when they get to LPAT, and to see if there's a knowledge gap or if there's a strength of knowledge, and if there's gaps that exist, what we can do to help augment that for the committee.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't have the specific number on how many appeals to the LPAT resulted in a subsequent change from the decision of the committee. What I can say is that the number of appeals to the LPAT are relatively low given the number of minor variance applications that we do have the committee consider within a 1-year time period. Certainly with regards to appeals to the LPAT that are brought forward by staff, I'm only aware of probably one that related where the city brought forward that appeal to the decision. And principally, we only do that where there is a fundamental issue in terms of interpretation with a official plan policy. So again, only one that I'm aware of in the last year, and then the overall number of appeals are quite small.
Thank you. And I guess my last comment was on the building division report. As everybody else has mentioned, it seems to be a fairly strong year over the past year as compared to the 2018 year to date. And that's promising to see. And actually, we kind of anticipated things to just keep going down after like really big years that we'd had before. But yeah, we're still pulling out some strong years in the building permits and in the total number of units created over that time. So that's great to see.
Any further comments from the committee? I see none, so if we can vote? Was it 2.10, 2.10 and 2.5? Deputy Mayor Helmer?
I had asked for 2.15 to be pulled, and it seems like it's included.
So we have 2.10 and 2.15 pulled.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So next up is 2.10, which is an application at 2890 and 2898 Woodhull Road, and that was pulled by Councillor Turner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to this, the recommendation has two parts. One is to introduce the, or to remove the holding provision, and the second one is that on the other property to refuse the zoning, the removal of that holding provision. With respect to that, is it possible for us to ask that, well, I guess the better question is, if we pass this recommendation, then that will be subject to reconsideration provisions, in which case the applicant couldn't then subsequently seek the removal of that holding provision for up to a year unless we did reconsideration, is what I was, is my thoughts on this, because it will be a decided matter of council at the end of that. If we were to pass A and refer back B for the applicant to have the opportunity to withdraw their request, then they could put forward that request at any time in the future when that condition's been satisfied. So I was just kind of looking to get some sense of that.
Through you, Madam Chair, to that question, and I know that the applicant's agent is here too, who might be able to speak to it better, but they are anxious to have the holding provision removed from the 2898 property. They had indicated to us that they were content with this recommendation and had no objection to it.
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Turner, to your question?
Yeah, I'm satisfied if that's the provisions in there. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't create any more complications if necessary, but if that's good, then that's why I wanted it pulled out separately so we could have that discussion. Thanks.
Thank you for doing so. And I see no further comments and looking for a motion to approve the consent item. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Next up is item 2.15, and this is the bylaw amendment request to the Downtown London Business Association Improvement Area. I understand Deputy Mayor Helmer pulled this.
Thank you. I just wanted to check. It seems quite reasonable to me. I wanted to ask through the chair to, perhaps the clerk who wrote the report, what does the downtown BIA think of the recommendations that you're making in the report?
Through you, Madam Chair, I haven't heard anything negative. They were made aware that the report was coming and what it was saying, and they had no comments, so I'm assuming that's a good thing.
And with that, I'm looking for a motion from Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Next up are our scheduled items, and our first one is a delegation. Mr. Levin, Chair of EPAC. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. What I'd like to actually start with your permission, is I haven't had an opportunity yet to introduce the quality of people on EPAC that you've appointed. It's quite a interesting, intelligent, exciting, I don't have enough adjectives to talk about this group. I don't know if I can get on screen for you very briefly what technical advice that staff and council are getting, primarily from folks who are PhDs or PhD candidates or Masters of Science students at Western. I have somebody in a PhD program who is researching how nutrients move through groundwater. A master's in civil and environmental engineering is working on a model for forecasting water quality and quality measures in the Thames. An individual's got geological engineering and geophysics background, PhD in biology with specialization in environment and sustainability. PhD candidate, isotopes of geochemistry of lakes. I don't understand half of what these people understand. Someone who's got multiple degrees, including a master's in biodiversity and a master's of law and environmental law. PhD student with 2 MSCs, 2 Masters of Science, 1 in entomology, study of insects, plant science, and environmental science. Excuse me, I've gone the wrong way. There we go. Another one is working on nutrient loadings. Masters of Environment and Sustainability candidate, an associate professor in geography at Western. She specializes in lakes, climate change, environmental change, and biogeographia. An experienced water resources engineer who practices in the field. One whose thesis researches strategies for mitigating bird window collisions, which I'll mention briefly in our work on the bird, with staff on the bird-friendly guidelines that Council has directed. PhD in plant pathology, a master's in biology, PhD in biology. I've got a forester, Bachelor of Applied Science, experience in areas of soil, groundwater assessments, particularly contaminated groundwater. So when we get these geotechnical reports, we actually have people on the committee who understand them. And someone who's actually was on a water control commission in the village of Croton-on-Hudson in New York. And there's 2 former politicians, so I have company now. Actually, he's also a former member of the federal parliament. So, sorry, Mike's here.
Thanks for the promotion, but not quite the cap.
Oh, yeah. But it's and I hope Mike agrees, it's a very good committee with a lot of good people providing you and your staff with a lot of good advice. So I know you've asked staff to review advisory committees. Might I suggest that you ask staff to include in their discussions conversations with chairs of your advisory committees to help in that review? I'd like to turn to our report, and I want to highlight just 2 areas for you. 2.3, which is the bird-friendly guidelines. Staff made a presentation. One of our representatives on EPAC from the Advanced Facility for Avian Research at Western provided a lot of information because it is his area of research. So staff has taken that information, has decided to strike a working group, including EPAC, LDI, and the home builders, to help bring you a bylaw that works well. So I want to thank staff for taking that input, moving very quickly to form the working group with a goal of getting it back to you, the bylaw, in April of next year. I also want to highlight in our report item 4.1a and highlight specifically for you the map that's on page 175 of your agenda. In the print copy, it doesn't show very well, but it does in the electronic. What I want to highlight on this is not so much the changes on the landscape that have happened both prior to this subject land status report and during the subject land status report, but to highlight 2 things. One, because of the various nature of, and probably a need to move wetlands that exist on the landscape, EPAC has made a recommendation to your staff that, like the subject land status report, that you have a comprehensive EIS done, not piecemeal done by each of the landowners. The biggest problem with this particular subject land status report is permissions weren't granted to about half the site. So there's a lot of unknown information, but because there will be likely a need to move wetlands, then how do you do that comprehensively if you're doing piecemeal environmental impact studies? The other important piece on this, and it's not specific to this property, there are other properties in this municipality that are both privately owned and publicly owned, and that have occurred during environmental assessments and environmental impact studies. What you'll notice on page 175 of that agenda is that about 30 hectares has been identified as habitat for meadowlarks. And that's important because under legislation, that land has to be replaced, that habitat has to be replaced. This has happened with the widening of Southdale Road from Boswick all the way to Woodhall. It's happened in this particular location and a couple of other locations in the Southwest. We've talked to Mr. Yeomans, we've talked to Mr. Barrett. Somewhere along the line, Council, our suggestion from EPAC is that this be dealt with comprehensively. That this is not an issue for individual landowners, it's not an issue for the city, it's an issue for everybody. That frankly, a way to do this is identify habitat somewhere and protect it, so that everybody has a piece of that habitat. And each individual doesn't have to look for the replacement. But I don't have any clear notion yet in my discussions from staff in how council would like to proceed on this. So I'd like to raise that today. Perhaps you can have some discussion about it here and give staff and EPAC some notion of how you would like to address this issue as it goes forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, any questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Levin. I remember that being a bit of an issue too, as I dealt with them on EPAC, the kind of the fragmented approach to evaluations. I see there being a couple impediments to it. One being the EISs themselves as being procured by the proponents. And so the EIS itself would be scoped to the lands that the proponent owns and not necessarily expanding beyond that. So the funding to be able to expand that to lands that weren't subject to the application itself per se, whether that be a municipal application or whether that be otherwise. Are there other municipalities that have been able to tackle that in a way that's a little more comprehensive? And I guess the second question, and perhaps this might go towards staff, is what authorities might we have to be able to gain access? I recognize in a lot of cases just the access is denied. In some cases, access wasn't sought, and so permission wasn't gained because we never sought that access because it wasn't subject to the area that the proponent was paying for specifically. But what opportunities might lie in there?
My understanding from reading the subject land status report was this was initiated as part of a secondary plan by the municipality. So it's the municipality's consultant in this particular case. My understanding is permission was sought. But in terms of the question of comprehensive, I've not done the research to see what other municipalities have done. I know some municipalities do reserve the right to do a peer review of an environmental impact study, but the question about doing a comprehensive one, I don't have an answer for.
Thank you. Yeah, and I kind of meant with you had mentioned two, the other EISs and then the subject lands as two parts. So that's where I was trying to just split it a little bit, or I wasn't. I was just kind of lumping them all into one. Through you, Madam Chair, perhaps to staff. Then I guess the question is, what right of access might we be able to have in order to affect appropriate and full EISs, recognizing that we have a fair amount of authorities when it comes to something like expropriations, that lands really are that of the Crown, not necessarily that of the property owner at that time. If we need to be able to do proper land use planning, it seems like something that we should be able to explore our rights in that regard.
Mr. Fleming?
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is that there are significant limitations to entering onto other people's lands for the purpose of, excuse me, doing environmental research for SLSRs or EISs. So we often run into barriers there. We do the best we can with tabletop analyses. Certainly we can review further with our legal staff if the committee would like us to do so. But my understanding is we've been through this a fair number of times, and we bump into the same sort of barriers around accessing sites when people don't want us on their land for that purpose. And that would be where they aren't involved in a particular planning application. It's a little bit different when they're the subject of an application that they've submitted, and in that case, it's a part of the requirements of the complete application.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Through you, Madam Chair, I can certainly appreciate the reluctance of some to see their lands evaluated and perhaps rezoned as a result of entry onto their properties. Yeah, I think Mr. Levin raises a good point, though. It really creates this piecemeal approach to planning and to our evaluation of ecosystems. Instead of an ecosystem doesn't stop at a theoretical kind of political boundary. It stops when the feature is over, and it's left to us to try and figure out how. Anyway, I think we've butted up against these a couple times in the past few planning committee meetings where we've taken a look and said there's a feature that continues on onto a neighboring property, and we haven't really fully appreciated the full impact and extent of that. So I'm not sure what recommendations or requests might be appropriate in here. I think if staff have gone round and round a couple times to try and figure out the appropriate legal parameters, but I still think there might be an opportunity where the municipality does have some rights in order to accomplish this. I think, as I mentioned before, one of the challenges might be the funding, the funding envelope, because the proponent themselves is commissioning the report, and so it's going to be limited exactly to their property boundaries and not necessarily to that beyond. But it would be, yeah, just years. I recall this being a significant issue. So it's not surprising to hear EPAC raise it again. I'm not sure what the potential solutions might be.
Mr. Fleming?
So, Madam Chair, I would suggest that if the committee would like us to do that work, we could do, again, have a conversation with our legal team. We can do a little bit of best practice research and understand what other municipalities are doing to address the same issue, to see if there's any other approaches that we're not aware of where more comprehensive reviews can be done beyond what we do already, which is, as I said, could be described as a tabletop or a computer mapping exercise, and then come back with a short report. I think we'd try and keep it short. On the second issue that Councillor Levin has raised, we're glad to take that back with respect to the Meadowlark and looking at, I just called you Councillor Levin, I'm sorry. My apologies. We're glad to take that back as well. My understanding from Mr. Adama, who is in charge of the Wet Oaks Dingman secondary plan, is he's glad to review that and the more comprehensive review of that particular species and the habitat and how that might be handled more comprehensively, and then come back perhaps with part 2 of the same report.
So I'm looking for a motion then from the committee. If there's a motion to have a review on the getting legal and limitations to a comprehensive EIS. Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd make that motion if it's appropriate, and also to receive the report of the chair as well.
And I would be, I'd second that as well. I think it's, I appreciate that we've already done this a number of times and have come back, especially when it comes to environmental impact studies and having a comprehensive look. But we have had our challenges the past number of years, and I think technology is advanced as well. Whatever municipalities are doing may another look at that to make sure that we're doing our due diligence. I agree. Woodland does not just stop on a line, and I even know with engineering using other forms of technology like drones and things like that, what are the legal implications to us as a city? Can we use those technologies? I think is worth a look at. Councillor Turner.
If I may, Madam Chair, perhaps it might be helpful to kind of split the work a bit, recognizing we've just got the 2-year work plan for Planning Committee, not wanting to overload too much. Perhaps on the legal components, we could ask planning staff to do that on the environmental scan in terms of what best practices of other municipalities might be. That might be something. Could we ask of your committee, Mr. Levin?
Chair, I'd be happy to take that on.
Okay, so we've got a sort of split.
We're trying to figure out what these are attached to. Through Madam Chair, I'm assuming that the first comment had to do with respect to the conversation on the secondary plan processes. And that it would be that the civic administration be requested to report back with respect to best practices, including a legal review for environmental impact studies related to secondary plans. Did I catch that right?
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I made my suggestion to Councillor Turner very quietly. I'm going to make it a bit more loudly. This seems like something where we could, have a reasonable discussion at our next meeting, and Councillor Turner could draft up some language about what it is he wants to do, have the staff report back. It sounds like Mr. Levin is interested in looking at this one thing which you already discussed. And I honestly don't think there's much direction that needs to happen there. I think EPAC does all kinds of things and they bring us reports already. So I think that's okay. And in this issue around the legal piece, if it's a scope down, I think what I would like try to avoid is just kind of drafting it and trying to craft it and then as much as we can, just because it doesn't seem to be super urgent and we could probably deal with it the next cycle. I don't know if that's something that councilor would like to do.
Councillor Turner.
You know, when you get the wink from the clerk, you've got to go with it. So, I think that's fair, and we can do that. And maybe I'll even try to write it up now so that I don't have to worry about it later on.
So with that, we'll have a motion come back to planning to look at these two items. Communication on the next agenda. Okay, thank you, Mr. Levin. And I'm looking for a motion to accept the EPAC report.
That was part of Councillor Turner's motion.
Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner. Councillor Squire.
I just wanted to comment on the makeup of the committee. I won't comment on the two former politicians. I don't really know what to say about that. But I think this points out something about this advisory committee and other advisory committees. I think one of the things I've seen in the last few years, not just here but elsewhere, is people who claim to be experts and have expertise in areas making judgments on things that they really aren't qualified to do. They may have found it on Google or they may have found it online and became instant experts. And one of the things I've really gotten an appreciation of in the last short period of time is that the city, particularly in the waste management area and in this area, is finding real experts and real scientists to look at these things and make what decisions that are really, really helpful. And Western University, I have to say, has a lot of people who are coming forward to sit on committees to do this kind of work. And I think it's really important. And I think the exercise of showing us the qualifications of these various people is not, it really hit me that we have a committee that has this level of expertise. And I also think you don't see levels of dispute and disagreement when you have experts. Why would I ever disagree with someone who has way more expertise than I would ever have in an area? So I just wanted to say how important I think that is for your committee and other committees.
Thank you, Councillor Squire, and thank you, Mr. Levin. Moving on to our next scheduled item. Oh, sorry, we need to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Next up is 3.2. It's a delegation. Mr. Sadhu, he's the Executive Director from the Argyle Business Improvement Area. Please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Randy Sadhu. I am the Executive Director at the Argyle BIA. Thank you for giving me the time to speak today. There are many positives occurring in East London, specifically within the Argyle community. The East Lyons Community Center is almost at completion, and the Argyle BIA has and will continue to roll out initiatives and programs to improve, beautify, and promote the Argyle area. However, we feel that in order to further elevate the area and continue building on the positives, that the next step would be to investigate and identify potential planning tools available which could benefit the Argyle community. Therefore, we are kindly requesting committee approval that staff undertake a comprehensive community regeneration study of the Argyle area to investigate and identify certain planning tools available that could be utilized to further build on the positive changes occurring in East London. The study would also consist of city planning staff in direct consult with the community on what they would like to see in the area, along with an analysis of development activity and a demographic profile of the community to assure root issues are being addressed. We have been in discussions with city planning, and they are in support of doing a study for the area. We hope that the committee will approve of the study in order to continue the long-term improvement realization of Argyle. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the committee. I just want to bring the committee's awareness that it is in the working group, or in the working plan, the planning working plan in the next 2 years. Sorry about that. Just not sure if you were aware of that, but just bringing it to the committee's attention. Councillor Squire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for my purposes, I guess I'd like to know is in terms of this planning, is there a list of places waiting for this? In other words, is this the only place? Does it sit on a list? Are other people looking to have this done? That's first. And the second issue is budget. Is there money set aside to do a study like this, and is there money in place to do that?
Through you, Madam Chair. So there's not necessarily a list of communities lined up for this. It's as a, they usually come to us as one-off requests. Recently, a similar study was done in Hyde Park. We have been in conversations with Mr. Sidhu for a number of months on this project, and which is how we were able to incorporate it into our work program. So the second part of your question is, this would be an exercise that's done in-house with existing staff, and we have allocated through our work program planning that we will have staff available to do that.
Councillor Squire.
Yeah, just thank you very much for that information. I think that's great that the association's done their homework in terms of approaching staff. We know where the money's going to come from. I think that's really, really helpful, that it isn't just something sort of coming to us in a way that we don't have prior knowledge of. So I think it's a good idea, and I'll wait to hear, but I'm not sure why we wouldn't do this.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yeah, I was going to move the recommendation. I think it's a good idea. I don't know if the work councillor is going to say something. I'm hoping he's supportive of it. I think he is. But you know, we had something like this done years ago in the Oldies Village. The Planners Action Team was a bit of a undertaking in the 90s, and it has resulted in all kinds of amazing things in that particular part of East London. And I think it's a good idea over in Argyle. I think looking at what you've got and seeing how you can build on all the positive things that are going on in the neighborhood, it's the first step to just taking it to the next level. So I'm happy to move it.
Thank you for those comments. And before I do go to the ward councillor, I am looking for a seconder as well. Councillor Squire. Welcome, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. Certainly appreciate the supportive comments I've heard here already. I think it's important that the committee also know the Argyle BIA is already undertaking work to revitalize and renew the area on its own. It has its own skin in the game with its own levy funding going to projects like the crosswalks and the pole wraps on our traffic lights that denote the entrance to the business corridor for the Argyle area. Of course, they're involved in many aspects of the community's life, whether it be supporting things that are going on in our schools, libraries. I know that they've certainly made their voices aware of what we could use in some of the neighborhood decision-making programs, having conversations with community groups, the community association, home and schools, a number of folks. And of course, I too want to say thanks to the planning staff. I certainly sat in on one of those meetings. I think it was very helpful for myself and for other members of the board to know. So, to Deputy Mayor Helmer's point, that OEV model is exactly what we're looking for here. There's obviously been great renewal in OEV, and we're hoping we can continue that right out east on Long Dundas and grow that renewal right across the city.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Lewis. And with that, we can vote. And I want to thank Mr. Sidhu for coming forward here and for your work in the community.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving on to our first public participation meeting, this is a item regarding an application at 1875 Warncliffe Road South. I am looking for, to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I would like to go up to the gallery and ask the public if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. There is. So the applicant, if there's anyone else that would like to speak to this application? I see none. I'd like to ask the committee if you would like to receive a presentation from staff. We do have the applicant here that would like to speak to it. Is the committee fine without the presentation? Okay, so we'll forego the staff's presentation, but I would like to ask the applicant to come forward with your name.
Madam Chair and committee members, good evening. My name is Laverne Kirkness of Kirkness Planning Consultants, and I'm working for York Developments, really, that owns 1875 Warncliffe Enterprises, who is the applicant here on this 18 acres or so. And this is quite an anomaly. But basically, we're zoning 12 industries so that they can continue their legacy industries out of the old Westminster Township days. It was a few decades ago. There's probably 200 employees in there amongst those 12 businesses that go out to work every day. And York owns pretty much most of the land to the north and to the east, and intends to develop the Boswick area for residential, including these lands. But in the foreseeable future, we'd like to continue these businesses. And therefore, we're here to capture or to hopefully have an official plan change approved, an exception type of official plan amendment in Chapter 10. And as well an implementing zoning bylaw to permit existing uses in existing buildings. So that in the foreseeable future, that's kind of what you'll see here, but in the long range, and since York owns pretty much most of the land around it, you can pretty well be assured that in the long term, everything will be residential, just as the land use policy framework, be it the London plan or the official plan or the Southwest Area Plan says. So we thank Nancy for her report and the staff for their recommendation. We agree with it, and we're hoping that the Planning Committee does too. If there are any questions, I'd be trying to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions from the committee? I see none. And with that, I'd like to have a motion to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And with that, committee, this is an application to recognize what already is existing and introducing policies for specific areas as well. So any questions, comments from the committee? See none. I'd like to have a motion to move the recommendation. Councillor Squire, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, committee, next up, we have a public participation meeting for 2497, 2591 Bradley Avenue. I'd like a motion to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I'd like to ask the public if there is anyone here that would like to speak to this application. You can just raise your hand. I see none. So I would like to go to the committee to see if they would like a presentation from staff. This is city-owned property at this location. And we're looking at amending the official plan with the special policy as well as the bylaw. I see none. So I would like to close the public participation meeting then. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I'd like to go to the committee. Any questions, comments? See, Mr. Thomas-Ennick.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to point out that on page 214 of the agenda, under section 4.5, there is a sentence there that says that the lands will be rezoned to open space 5. That's a typo. It's open space 1. The bylaw is correct. It's just the text of the report. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And with that, I'm looking for a motion to accept the recommendation. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Next up, we have another public participation meeting, 3.5 at 3427 Paul Peel Avenue. I would like to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
This is a zoning bylaw amendment to allow 7 single detached homes. I'd like to ask anyone from the public who is here to speak to this application. I see no one here. I would like to ask the committee members if they would like a presentation from staff. I see none. So I would like to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Any comments from the committee? Motion to accept the recommendation, Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving on to our last public participation meeting for, it's 3.6. It is an application at 3260 Singleton Avenue. I am looking to open the public participation meeting. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
In committee, we do have a presentation from staff. Ms. Riley? Thank you.
Just give me 1 second to pull this up. No. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, there we go. I'll make this brief since there's no members of the public here. This is an application for 3260 Singleton Ave. It is a vacant land condo application. The subject lands are located on the south side of South Dill Road West, just east of Spring Meadow Road. The site is generally flat and is located adjacent to a church. To the east, low-density residential development and medium-density residential development to the south and west. The application is, again, for a vacant land plan of condominium for the 3260 Singleton Ave. It is to create 62 vacant land condo units to be developed in the form of cluster townhouses. Provided the proposed development on the screen, which showing the development along South Dill Road with the 62 units access off of Spring Meadow Road. I've also put up here, because there was concerns about landscaping, which I will address in a bit, just to show you the landscaping plan, and there's a quite a big buffer of landscaping along South Dill Road. The London plan does identify this as a neighborhood place type in the 1989 official plan, multifamily medium density residential. The proposed development is consistent with the classification of streets and their intended character, goals, and functions, and is consistent with the policies, neighborhood policy type. Through the process, we sent out notice to the public to see if there's any concerns. We did get some concerns back. We got a traffic concern from 3 people in the area. I do want to note a traffic study was completed and accepted by the city, and no concerns were raised from the Transportation Division. They also were concerned about landscaping, access, construction, and school capacity. But the larger concern was the increase in density, and this was done through a minor variance application, which did go to the committee on October the 28th and was approved. And it was a very slight increase. And I do want to note that there is a higher zoning on the land, which is in R9, which does actually permit a greater density. So our recommendation, based on our analysis, is to, at the approved or the proposed vacant land condominium does represent an efficient use of land and does encourage compact urban form. The provincial policy statement, the London plan, and the official plan do encourage this form of development. So therefore, the applicant's proposal to allow for this cluster detached dwelling in this area is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, just more for my education. There was a part in the, in number 3.1 that I wasn't aware of, but I think it makes sense. So it was, that, it says vacant land condominium development cannot be phased under the Condominium Act, which is why the applicant brought forward the south portion first for approval. Is the rationale for that, that the owners in a condominium corporation wouldn't incur new liabilities if they were to expand a condo development after it had already first been established? Is that the rationale for it?
The primary rationale is that the Planning Act doesn't allow for it, but I believe that is likely what the rationale is behind the Planning Act not allowing for phased vacant land condos.
That makes sense. It's more just for my education because it seemed like something I hadn't encountered before, but it seemed to make sense on its face, but I appreciate that. Thanks.
Committee, if you allow me to, I've got a question about the construction traffic. It seems like there's a lot of already developed homes in this area. Is there a construction traffic plan for this area, or where will the traffic for the construction be going?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as you can see on the plan up on the screen, the access is onto Singleton Road, or Spring Meadow, and that will take it out to Southdale. So it's a fairly direct access right out to the arterial. So we're anticipating that no trucks will be coming through the subdivision from Warrencliffe, and their only access will be on Southdale.
Thank you for that. And any other technical questions of staff? I see none. I'd like to go to the applicant, if the applicant is here. Welcome.
Hello. We are in agreement with the staff report, and we had brought a couple of slides just as historical background, if necessary. There had been some comments that were raised by members of the public that they felt that the current site plan was not representative of what had been originally proposed at a community meeting that we had back in 2016. And so I have those slides if anybody wants to see them. But if there's nobody from the public raising that as an issue, then I don't feel that it's necessary. So I will leave it to your discretion if you want to see them.
I wonder if I can ask the gallery if there's anyone from the public here that would like to speak to this application to give us a general idea. I see none, so I'll go to the committee if you would like to see the slides or a further presentation from the applicant. No, I think we're fine then.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask one more time if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. I'd like to go to the public now. And I see none, so I would like to go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
With that, I'd like to go to the committee. Any questions, comments? Bringing forward the recommendation, Deputy Mayor Halmer.
I'll move the recommendation.
And I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving on to number 4, items for direction. I see none. And going to number 5, deferred matters, additional business. Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, I have some language perhaps I could send to the clerk on the motion. We could just take care of it now from EPAC, if that's that might help. So if you give me about 10 seconds, I'll forward it by email and I can read it to the committee.
I wonder if we could just wait a few seconds then to see the motion?
And if you'd like, I can read them to you. One, that staff review best practices and legal limitations for performing subject land status reports and environmental impact studies on lands that are owned by multiple parties, and in particular where one or more property owners refuse staff entry onto their lands. 2, that the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee be requested to perform an environmental scan of practices in other municipalities related to these evaluations. And 3, that staff review the opportunity to plan for meadowlark habitat on a comprehensive ecological systems basis so that secondary plans and planning applications can address habitat requirements in accordance with this larger context.
And I'm looking for a seconder. I'll second that if the committee will allow me. And thank you, Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And with that, committee, I'm looking for adjournment. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? We are adjourned.